if we were exploring a planet and we had layers of quarantine procedures between the population centers and the survey planets, and they're probably not going to be 100% effective, but we could put these barriers up, like quarantine zone 1, quarantine zone 2, quarantine zone 3. Now you're free to go into the population.
I see.
You could reduce those percentages so fast.
It would be something like the specialized team that goes down to the planet has signed up for this. They volunteered to like, the trade-off is that they get to be the first people on the planet. Names written in the history book. Also the cutting edge of exploration. But they've signed up knowing that, like, hey, if it goes bad, we're going to leave you. And we have to for the species. And then to a lesser degree, everyone on the ship can be quarantined. And then to a lesser degree, it's like you cannot come back to the home planet. You cannot come back to Earth until you've stopped off at one of the outlying stations. And then once you've proven that you're healthy in those stations, then you can get to another station. So you have this onion layers of safety around Earth.
That's right. And you could create a system and a culture that's just expected, known, everybody's trained up on it.
Yeah.
And it could be very, very safe. I wonder, do you think it's likely that there will be contagious pathogens on other planets? I suspect not.
Right. I've heard this argument.
Okay. So the argument is that the pathogens on Earth that attack humans have co-evolved with humans and other wildlife. So they're really honed into our internal body environment with the DNA and the cells and the chemistry, so they can really attack our bodies, and we've co-evolved defenses. On other planets where they're not co-evolved, then it's unlikely that those pathogens or whatever will survive in our body very well. And then on top of that, not only do they have to be able to survive and thrive, but then they have to be contagious as well. I think the chances of that are being very unlikely. However, I'm not convinced. I think it could be that maybe there could be some really deadly pathogens out there that are super contagious, that like the flood in Halo. It's like not necessarily foreseen like a disease in the way we think of it, but it's like it just corrupts everything or something. I'm not sure how that would work.
I see what you're saying. So to summarize that, it's, for example, like avian bird flu and COVID, they came from birds and bats respectively. And while zoonotic diseases, I don't know if they're common or not, I'm not a virologist, but the idea of a disease jumping from animals to humans, these both have to survive in an Earth-like atmosphere. They both have to survive in Earth-like animals. Or if on a different planet, whatever diseases they have may be just completely incompatible with us. That being said, there could be something that just exploits something about our human biology that nothing else has. And if we have never encountered it, then we also don't have built-in defenses. So say like you get an illness, you get a bacterial infection, you get your raised fever. That's the human body saying after whatever millions of years, like this is something that works. So say you have something that's catalytic in your body. So not something that grows and exponentiates like a virus or like bacteria, but something that just straight up rips apart cells. Like getting hotter, I don't think that does anything. It makes it, in fact, there's more energy in the system. Like things move faster. So for that, I think you wouldn't have anything to do to stop it.
So for survey missions, if we set up these quarantine zones to separate the Earth from the survey places with these layers of quarantine like an onion, not in order for those pathogens you're describing to get through, if it's just ripping apart of cells, it would be obvious that the person's ill in zone 1. So they would never get through, and Earth is in no danger.
In fact, zone 1, the drop team, the survey team, they don't have fuel to get back.
We're just letting them die.
Well, they have no way they can override the safety. It requires someone on the ship to say, you guys are tested safe. We will send someone down to pick you up.
That could be zone 1, is you send a habitat down with them. And before they are picked up, which they can't do by themselves, they have to go into the habitat, shut the door, and just hang out for 2 weeks. And if nobody feels ill, that could be like pass for zone 1. And then zone 2 is, up in space. And then you got to hang out for 6 months in space. And if nobody's feeling ill, they go through the series of tests to find anything.
then you can, yeah. So I guess 2 weeks down in the habitat on the planet, 2 weeks in the space in the shuttle, because who knows if getting into low G then messes up. Then you can dock with your mothership. Then you can go to the New Year's station. So there's like layers of protection where each step requires somebody of higher authority to say approved or not.
Yeah. And you would use time for the testing. That would be a big thing. And you would have this series of tests, chemical, biological, everything, to continually blood test, urine test, whatever fluid test in the person.
Test.
Exactly. That's very important. And
I mean, actually, maybe, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Every fluid you would do.
Well, like, I mean, I want to give legitimacy to this. Like, if we find out that you got some type of radiation on the planet that messes up your genes, your haploids, well, we also don't want to introduce that into the species.
Yeah, exactly. So you have the time layers, you have the physical layers, you have the testing layers. So you would, if something were to get back to Earth, it would have to get through all of these zones with all of these tests. I mean, it's almost that point. It's almost impossible. The probability of something getting through that is approaching zero. In addition to we have argued that the probability that something is effectively deadly to people is low anyway. So you're stacking all these probabilities on top of each other. I think you could create a fairly safe system.
You could. But this is all under the assumption that people follow the rules. So you got one privateer that's like, I went down to the planet, I got sick, but I don't want to die alone. I don't care. I'm out. I'm out of here. And then they go just straight to Earth. They say, I don't want to be alone. I don't want to die. I'm going to go to a doctor. That ship needs to be destroyed before it enters Earth's atmosphere.
Yeah. So you're talking. So if society is organized, then
it's lawful good.
Let's just say organized, so that the person it would take an extremely selfish person to go to another planet and then feel sick and be the first thing to do is go infect Earth.
It would take a primate that's freaking out.
Yeah, I realize that there are selfish people, and if we created a system where the selfish thing would be to find the nearest quarantine place to get the best medical procedure possible,
and then we just vaporize you without you knowing,
or you could just be in quarantine. You don't have to be.
Well, what I'm saying is, this person doesn't want to do that.
Yeah. So
I see what you're saying. The best thing they could do, the most selfish thing they can do, is actually the right thing.
Right. So if they go down to the planet, if they take their disease down to Earth in a super selfish way, in a panic, well then that's death penalty sort of stuff. But if their most selfish move is to get to the quarantine place and they'll get the best medical care and they'll be isolated, then their selfishness and what is good for Earth are in line.
We harness their selfishness.
Yeah. So the only people you'd have to worry about, like, very panicky people, but how well are they going to be able to, fly a ship to an unknown place with a crew, all that stuff. I think it's not about reducing the chances of this happening to zero. It's about getting it as low as possible.
Well, I don't know. I mean, on if we're dealing with a species ending situation, then that probability needs to be zero. And needs to be zero.
But it can never be zero. It's impossible.
Yeah, I guess we always risk that someone could come back to Earth and just wreck everyone.
It's actually, this happens in the modern day. We have some discussion about aircraft safety. What should be the chances that an airplane crashes? Zero. Just make it zero. Okay.
I mean, negative even.
What does that even mean?
It means you send up one plane, it has a problem, and then 2 planes land.
Like, if you look at safety situations, they're never like, okay, we're just going to reduce. The only way to reduce flying risk to zero is to not fly.
So the only way to bring the probability of selfish people going to exoplanets, bringing back something dangerous, is to not have people.
It's not have people. So then what's the point? Let the aliens win.
Yeah. Give up right away.
But you could create a scenario where you put probability, the probability reducing layers and incentives at every step of the way in an organized society so that the probability is approaching zero.
So in that system, it requires that the selfish option is also the best option for the society, which means that in this case of quarantining and medical stuff, it means that the official government system has to have the best doctors. So how do we guarantee that happens? Because otherwise, I can totally imagine and also best doctors and like the quickest system. Because you can imagine like a rich person being like, yeah, they have the best doctors, but it's going to take me too long. I want help now. Or I can imagine them saying like the quarantine system will see me very quickly, but I think another doctor over here is better, so I'm going to go do that. I'm going to go around the system.
I would argue that it's not about making the best doctors the government doctors. It's about decentralizing authority in a responsible way and creating a web of incentives so that no matter what selfish or uninformed or whatever choice somebody makes, it always falls under the web of the incentives and choices.
Oh, I like it. That's speaking like an economist. I like it.
So, I mean, there's also some historical perspective here. Like 150 years ago, 25% of the population was literate. If a person back then said, let's just make all the government officials literate and hire no illiterate people in the government, one choice could be, well, let's make sure we have these huge filtering systems to make sure only people in the government can read, or just make everybody read. So maybe our standards for education of doctors now could just be expanded so that our top doctors now will be the everyday doctor in the future. In the same way that literate was pretty elite back in the day, and now it's 100% literacy across the board.
It's not 100%.
It's not 100%.
So I'm doing the same thing you did about 0%.
I mean, absolutely right. Yeah.
Yeah. It's quite high.
And there's some subtlety in there with like literacy is not like an on-off switch. There's gradation. Yeah. Some people can read at certain levels, and other people can read at higher levels. But it's certainly a huge improvement in historical standards, right?
How can I twist this?
1 million people. Have you ever seen 1 million zeros printed out on a page? It is a stack like that thick. That's how many like pieces.
Wait, how big are the zeros?
A normal.
If I put what is them? I take 8.5 by 11, maybe some A4 for our European viewers, and then I put a single zero, and then I need 1 million papers. What are you talking about here?
Yeah. So I think it's like somewhere between 10 and 12 point font, one-sided. Maybe it's two-sided. I can't remember. And you just fill a standard 8 by 11 piece of paper with margins, standard margins. Just fill that rectangle with zeros. It's a huge stack of paper. And you're talking, there's 7.5 billion people on the planet. And we're trying to coordinate, that many people. Like everything we ever do will have bad effects, good effects. People will be gamed in the system. Like it all has to be probability talk. This is my understanding, right? We can't be like, well, let's solve this. It'll be 100% effective, done. Like impossible. Yeah. We're talking about billions and billions of people.
I agree. Mm-hmm. It's got to be probabilistic. Anything else is just short-sighted. Not short-sighted. It's shallow-sighted.